now on part 4 of a 5-part series I've been doing on religious experience. Now to recap, part 1 served as an introduction where a definition of terms was given and a brief defense of the principle of credulity took place. Part 2 concerned itself with a religious experience as a belief-forming disposition which aids in suggesting that the belief in God or that God exists is a properly basic belief. Note that part 2 was not an argument for God's existence, but a suggestion that religious experience serves as a disposition to accept the belief that God exists. Part 3 gave an initial argument from religious experience from the atheist William Rowe without Rowe's modified premise. It was argued that the modification to premise 1 in that argument was not correct, and thus Rowe's original argument, if successful, provides an argument from religious experience. Thus we arrive now at part 4, which will concern itself with an additional argument from religious experience formulated by Kaiman Quan. The argument takes into account the principle of credulity, more specifically the critical trust framework, the established nature of theistic experience, now more on that narrow definition of religious experience in a moment, encourage beliefs, and the ultimately non-defeated nature of theistic experience. The argument can be formulated as follows. Premise 1, the principle of credulity is correct. Premise 2, theistic experience is a well-established type of experience. Premise 3, it seems epistemically to a subject that God exists on the basis of theistic experience. 4, and that is a tornado siren. Back to the argument. Premise 4, the theistic experience is not defeated, and therefore premise 5, the subject is justified to believe that God exists. Now in this argument, Quan uses a narrower definition of religious experience, namely theistic experience. Here he classifies religious experience into 3 main groups, namely 1, theistic experience, 2, theism-compatible non-theistic experience, and 3, theism-incompatible non-theistic experiences. By theistic experience, Quan is defining those experiences where the subject undergoes some event, feeling, or process that is descriptive of theism exclusively. By theism-compatible non-theistic experience, Quan refers to those religious experiences that are not specifically theistic, but are not logically incompatible with theism. An example of that would be like an impersonal sense of God, as opposed to a personal sense. Lastly, by theism-incompatible non-theistic experience, Quan is referring to those religious experiences that seem to contradict theistic experience. The objection that the religious experiences contradict themselves, again, will be featured in part 5. Now, premise 1 states the principle of critical trust, which incorporates the principle of credulity, along with other principles, for example, the principle of testimony, simplicity, consensus, epistemic defeat, etc., and states the principle of critical trust to be true. Now see the description for a definition of all the principles within the principle of critical trust. As a reminder, it was argued in part 1 that the principle of credulity is more likely than its negation due to the practical rationality and the justification bestowed by the argument from impartiality. Therefore, I will not restate a defense of premise 1 here, rather see part 1 for a defense of premise 1. Now, premise 2 appeals to experiences had present day to historical past via theism, example Christianity, Judaism, Islam, etc. First, in regards to premise 2, Kaiman Quan suggests that the amount of people who have such experiences is extraordinary. Specifically, Quan uses data from Schaeffer and Lamb, 1995, and Hick, 2006. The data from Schaeffer and Lamb suggests that the percentage of those who adhere to some sort of religion is around 84%. Of that 84%, 52% is a combination of Muslim and Christian faiths, thus a large majority of it is theistic. Second, Quan suggests that it is reasonable to believe that substantial portions of the religious people have had some sort of religious experience. In Hick's study in Britain, results indicated 36 of 2,000 random people polled had some sort of religious experience. Thus it would seem unreasonable to label religious experience as odd or poorly established in light of the tens of millions of people who encounter such events. Such experiences, moreover, have been detailed in numerous types, including 1. Numinous experience, 2. Mysticism, 3. Sense of presence of God, experience of grace, baptism of the Holy Spirit, corporate experiences, sensory theistic experiences, to name a few. Thus, such experiences should not be viewed as vague or exclusively unique to particular subjects, for while there could be uniqueness in said experiences, more than likely the experiences can fit into one of the suggested categories of experiences I've already named. Thus it would be safe to say that theistic experience is well established. That is, considering the millions of people who are having these experiences, they are established. A few possible caveats could be suggested here at this point. First, an objector could say that while religious experiences are well established, they fail in comparison or the established nature of other experiences, such as sensory experience, let's say. However, the requirement here is simply too stringent. Requiring universal experience among human beings for a specific experience to be established wouldn't even allow for sensory experience to be considered, since there are many people who do not experience such things like deafness, blindness, paralysis, etc. Yet we consider such experiences that fail universal acceptance to be established. Thus, why should religious experience be any different? Second, objector could, for sake of argument, assume that an infinite God exists, then posit the problematic relationship between a finite creature experiencing an infinite God. Specifically, the objector could suggest that one cannot have immediate experience of the infinite attributes of God. However, if we take sensory experience as an example again, it would be hard to rectify how human beings can see, quote-unquote, such massive structures or locations as the Great Wall of China or the Mississippi River, since they are too large to see. Likewise, consider three-dimensional objects. We cannot have immediate experience of each side of a pencil that lay directly below us. All we can see is the top. Thus, Quan states that, quote, if a concept of experience renders most of our actual experiences impossible, for example, the concept that one cannot immediately experience something grander than oneself, then what needs to be changed perhaps is the concept itself. In this spirit, I, that would be Quan, would suggest there is no need to insist on too strong a connection between experience, let's say sensing God or being appeared to by water, and the object, that would be God or the water. As long as the appearance of a transparent, colorless liquid reliably indicates the presence of H2O in our context, and the water causes in my appropriate way or visual experience, then we can see water, H2O. Premise 3 is an example of an incorrigible position. An incorrigible belief describes something that seems to be of X, even if X is not true. However, this is not an issue for X does not have to be actually true, for an incorrigible belief is about perception. In other words, a belief is incorrigible if the subject holding the belief could never be in a position to correct it or be mistaken about it. Hence, premise 3 suggests that the subject of the religious experience is epistemically aware that God exists via the experience he or she is undergoing. Thus, one cannot argue that the subject is wrong in his or her perception, because such a perception is a first-person event. Now, premise 4 is obviously a major premise. It is here that Quan suggests that theistic experiences are not defeated. Part 5 of this series will deal with multiple objections against religious experience, and thus Part 5 will provide the bulk of defense of premise 4. Thus, Quan argues that religious experience serves as first principles in epistemology and are prima facie justified. Such justification of belief in the transcendent and personal God via theistic experience lends support to the existence of God. In light of the practical and argued justification of the principle of credulity, the widely attested experience of God throughout history, and the undefeated nature of religious experience, it follows that based on religious experience, individuals are justified in believing that God exists. Peace.